So let's get started. The first thing we want to discuss is what are we dealing with? This is just a sample transactional data where I am simulating some batch processing to illustrate that you can run these kind of rule sets not just on overall data sets but on incremental systems as well if that's a requirement for you. Now let's discuss the three pillars that we're going to focus in on. The first one are rules. Data quality rules are zero-code, low-code systems which are created from a set of templates which allow for endless customizability. The key aspect here is as an end user, you just have to select the type of rule sets that you want to work with and define the exact conditions that you want to work with within them. Case in point, a simple duplicity check asks you to select the composite key or the specific columns on which you wouldn't like duplicates. If there are any filter conditions to avoid certain rule sets or records to follow through with this particular rule. And of course, the success criteria could be altered. If you don't want to raise alarms if, say, 1% duplicates exist because you expect that, and you only want to raise alarms at 5% thresholds, you can define that within the system itself as and when needed. Another type of check that is quite common is a transactional type. So in this case, it's a domain check, data dictionary type check that the application comes with. And here, as you can see, what we're trying to check is if the transaction type is in the specific domain. And these domains can be customized. You can have your very own data dictionary here as well. And so this is another type of validation, which makes sure that the values in a particular column pertain to an existing data dictionary or domain. And these two cover the major use cases of duplicity and domain. An attribute covers everything else that encompasses. And I do mean everything else by that logic. Because as you're working with the data quality rule sets, you might be encountering simple null checks that you want to define. And it's as simple as this. And you can even define business rule validations where you want to check if values are between existing domains or existing limits. You can also check if the values that you're working with are pertaining to, say, set amount of alphanumeric patterns. Think license plates, think GUIDs and others. And the reason the application is very versatile with this is the fact that, well, while we do have a great amount of operators by default, you can add and customize your very own operators as well. That's one of the best things about the product. Say you have a niche use case and say you're working in a particular industry with this niche use case. An example that comes to mind from my experience is we had a client who works in the pharmaceutical insurance industry, and they have to apply a good amount of compound rules together across multiple financial columns. These rule sets are simple rules combined together, making sure that financial columns don't have any kind of punctuation, they don't have currency signs, and so on and so forth. This is a simplified version of that operator, and as you can see, we can define it once, and reusing it is as simple as adding the rule set right here, selecting the column on which you would like to define this rule set, and then adding the operator with or without the potential parameters. That is something that you can work with as well. I can define the default and custom dimensions for this as well as severity, and as we discussed, define the success criteria as well as the filter conditions based on my rule set requirement. And once these rules are defined, they can be easily reused, imported and exported across projects, as well as reused across environments as well. So it's always a one-time setup that you can work with, and the application can take it from that particular point of view. For everything else, we have SQL query and SQL expression. Of course, a good old SQL comes in handy when you want to make sure that you have certain rule sets that you want to apply, and you do not want to go ahead with the attribute system. SQL query and expressions help with that. And if your validation is along the lines of aggregations, like in this example, where you want to make sure that certain metrics are equivalent to other metrics or static values, for that we have aggregation check. No, this is not the only place where we have corresponding aggregation check, single metric, single compare. We have an entire node which is pertaining to this called metrics compare, which is used highly by a lot of financial customers of ours, where they want to ensure that certain aggregates from one table match aggregates from the other table. But we have that in data quality rule sets as well. So once you define these rule sets, what happens next? Well, the application is going to firstly segregate the good and bad records into different data sets. So that's one of the key things that's repeated throughout the system. We're going to convert this into a while telling exactly the specific column and the rule set that has failed for this specific record. This is really helpful as an end user, as I can just go into a system, see what exact rule failures I'm dealing with, and either work with that accordingly in a manual fashion. I can even define some auto healing rule sets and auto healing transformations if that's a specific use case. And most importantly, since it's a data set, I can do anything else as well, be it sending these records to the vendor or anything in between. That's the key aspect. What you're seeing is just about, say, a few preview of records, but this is an entire data set. And in true data set fashion, if I add a SQL node, you can see these data sets written right here. So once you have segregated the good and bad records, you can, of course, save them as file, as a view, do a lot more processing to it, and of course, everything in between. So that's the first thing, which regards to what rules does. It segregates the good and bad records into different data sets for further processing.
For further questions, feel free to reach contact@datagaps.com. Request a free demo, scan the QR code below. Thank you.